Sloane Avery Monroe, 32, stood frozen at her grandfather's funeral, watching her parents fight over the will they hadn't known about until today. The same parents who'd abandoned her with Grandpa William when she was 9, claiming they needed to find themselves. Now they were back not for closure, but for money that would never touch their hands. Grandpa's final revenge was about to unfold, and Sloane held the key to it all. Hey everyone! Before I dive into this wild family drama that changed my life forever, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, and while you're at it, hit that like and subscribe button. If you've ever experienced family betrayal or witnessed karma coming full circle, this story will resonate with you. Trust me when I say, what happens next is the family revenge drama you didn't know you needed. I remember the day my parents left like it was yesterday, though. 23 years have passed. It was a crisp October morning in our small Massachusetts town. Mom and Dad had packed their suitcases, loading them into our station wagon, while I sat on the porch steps of Grandpa William's Victorian home, my 9-year-old legs swinging nervously beneath me. "It's just for a little while," Sloane Mom said, her voice falsely bright as she knelt before me. Her auburn hair, the same shade as mine, was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, and she wore more makeup than usual. "Dad and I need some time to figure things out." Dad stood by the car, checking his watch impatiently. He hadn't hugged me goodbye, just ruffled my hair awkwardly from a distance. "Be good for your grandfather, kiddo. We'll call every Sunday." Grandpa William stood behind me, his weathered hand resting protectively on my shoulder. At 67, he was still strong and tall, with intelligent blue eyes that seemed to see through everyone's pretenses. "How long is a little while?" I asked, my voice small, even to my own ears. Mom and Dad exchanged a glance I was too young to interpret, but would recognize years later as guilt mixed with relief. "Just a few months," Dad said vaguely. "Your mom and I need to reconnect. Find ourselves again." Grandpa's hand tightened on my shoulder. "Eleanor Thomas. I hope you understand what you're doing here," he said, his voice carrying a warning that made my mother flinch. "Dad, please, Mom," sighed. "We've discussed this. It's better for Sloane to have stability right now, and we can't provide that." "Stability?" Grandpa echoed the word, dripping with disdain. "Is that what you call abandoning your child? We're not abandoning her," Dad snapped, finally showing some emotion. "We're leaving her with family while we work on our marriage. Many couples do this. Many couples don't drop their child off like an unwanted pet at a shelter," Grandpa retorted. I started to cry, then silent tears tracking down my freckled cheeks. Mom noticed and quickly pulled me into a perfunctory hug, her expensive perfume enveloping me, a scent that would forever remind me of loss and false promises. "We love you, sweetie," she whispered. "This is just temporary." But even at 9, I could feel the hollowness of her words. Something in me knew they weren't coming back soon. Still, I nodded and wiped my tears, trying to be brave. They drove away that afternoon, waving from the car windows. The last image I had was of Mom looking back, once her face unreadable, before they turned the corner and disappeared from my life. The few months stretched into a year. The Sunday calls dwindled from weekly to monthly to special occasions only. Christmas came and went, with just a card and a store-bought gift that showed they had no idea who I was becoming. My 10th birthday arrived with a phone call that lasted less than 5 minutes. Meanwhile, Grandpa William became my rock. A retired high school principal with a passion for woodworking, he adjusted his entire life to accommodate a grieving, confused little girl. He learned to braid hair by watching YouTube tutorials. He joined the PTA and attended every parent-teacher conference. He helped with science projects and drove me to soccer practice. Most importantly, he never lied to me. "Are they coming back, Grandpa?" I asked him one night about 18 months after they'd left. We were sitting on his workshop porch drinking hot chocolate and watching fireflies dance across his meticulously maintained garden. The smell of fresh-cut wood and varnish surrounded us, scents that meant safety and home to me now. Grandpa was silent for a long moment, his weathered face thoughtful in the fading light. "I don't know, Sloaney," he said, finally using the nickname only he was allowed to use. "I wish I could promise you they will, but I believe in telling you the truth always." I nodded, appreciating his honesty even as it hurt. "What I can promise is this," he continued, taking my small hand in his calloused one. "I will always be here. You will always have a home with me for as long as you need or want it. And you will never have to wonder where you stand with me." That night marked a turning point. I stopped waiting by the phone on Sundays. I stopped asking when they might return. Instead, I began to build a new life with Grandpa William, a life full of stability, honesty, and unconditional love. As the years passed, my parents became more like distant relatives, people who sent birthday cards with crisp $50 bills tucked inside, who called on major holidays with shallow questions about school and friends. They had settled in California, apparently having found themselves in the tech industry. They occasionally suggested I visit, but never made concrete plans. Grandpa never spoke ill of them to me, but his disappointment in his daughter and son-in-law was evident in the tightness around his eyes whenever they were mentioned. Instead of focusing on what I had lost, he helped me build a life around what I had: a loving home, good friends, excellent education, and the confidence that came from being truly valued by someone. By the time I graduated high school as valedictorian, I had accepted the reality I had been abandoned, but I had also been saved. Living with Grandpa William turned out to be the greatest blessing of my life, though it took me years to fully appreciate it. His Victorian home in Westfield, Massachusetts, became my sanctuary, a place where childhood could unfold naturally despite the emotional wounds I carried. Grandpa was methodical about establishing routines that made me feel secure. Every morning began with breakfast together, usually his famous blueberry pancakes on weekends, where we'd discuss our plans for the day. Evenings always included dinner at the oak table he'd crafted himself, followed by what he called perspective time on the porch swing, where we'd each share one good thing and one challenging thing from our day. "Perspective keeps us honest, Sloaney," he'd say. "Never run from the hard truths, but never forget to count your blessings either." His parenting style was an unusual blend of old-fashioned values and progressive thinking. He insisted on good manners, responsibility, and education, but he also encouraged critical thinking and standing up for myself. When I was 12 and came home crying because Madison Turner had made fun of my thrift store clothes, Grandpa didn't just comfort me with platitudes. "People who judge others by their possessions reveal more about themselves than about you," he said, his blue eyes intense. "But if these clothes bother you, let's make a plan." Together we budgeted my allowance and his modest pension, finding ways to buy a few new items while altering others. He even learned to sew watching online tutorials, turning my too short jeans into fashionable capris with decorative stitching. There he said when we finished, "Problem solved through ingenuity, not insecurity." Grandpa William's basement workshop became the heart of our home. Initially a place where he built furniture to supplement his pension, it evolved into our shared creative space. He taught me woodworking when I turned 13, starting with simple birdhouses and progressing to intricate jewelry boxes by high school. "Working with your hands connects you to reality," he'd explain, guiding my movements with the lathe. "In a world full of virtual distractions, there's something honest about creating something tangible." These workshop sessions often became our most meaningful conversations. The rhythmic sounds of sanding and carving seemed to open spaces for truth between us. "Do you think they ever loved me, Grandpa?" I asked one day when I was 15, the question emerging suddenly as we worked side by side. His hands stilled on the cherry wood cabinet he was detailing. "Yes," he said after a thoughtful pause. "They did love you, Sloan. But loving someone and being worthy of their love are different things. Your parents love the idea of you, but they weren't ready for the reality. Is that supposed to make me feel better? I asked, blinking back tears. No, he replied honestly. It's just the truth, and I promised always to give you that. But here's another truth. Their failure isn't your burden to carry. Throughout my teenage years, Grandpa navigated each challenge with the same thoughtful approach. When I had my first heartbreak at 16 after Jason Connolly dumped me for a cheerleader, Grandpa didn't dismiss my pain with cliches about other fish in the sea. Instead, he took me fishing at dawn on Lake Congamond, where we sat in companionable silence until I was ready to talk. Rejection hurts, he acknowledged, but it's also information. The wrong people teach you to recognize the right ones when they come along. For my education, he was relentless. A former educator himself, he supplemented my public schooling with classic literature museum visits and practical skills. He attended every school function, beaming with pride from the front row at debates, recitals, and sports events. My parents' sporadic involvement became a strange footnote to my adolescence. They'd reappear occasionally with grand gestures, an expensive laptop for my 16th birthday, an offer to pay for a European-class trip they knew Grandpa couldn't afford. These moments always left me conflicted, torn between gratitude and resentment. Grandpa never interfered with these gestures, but always provided context afterward. Gifts are easy, Sloane, he told me, after my parents sent me a designer prom dress with a casual note about how they thought of me when they saw it. Daily presence is harder. Remember that when you judge both them and yourself. College decisions brought my parents briefly back into the picture. They pushed for prestigious coastal universities, offering to pay the considerable tuition. Stanford would open so many doors, Mom enthused, during one of her rare visits, looking out of place in Grandpa's modest living room. Or maybe Columbia. You deserve the best education. I glanced at Grandpa, noting the tight line of his mouth. At 76, his health had begun to show signs of decline, subtle things like pausing on the stairs, occasional forgetfulness. The thought of leaving him alone for a distant university filled me with dread. I've decided on UMass Amherst, I announced. They've offered me a full scholarship and I can come home on weekends. But that's so, Provincial Dad protested. We can afford better. Better doesn't always mean right, I replied, using one of Grandpa's favorite phrases. UMass has an excellent program in environmental engineering and I'll graduate debt-free. The real reason hung unspoken between us. I wouldn't leave Grandpa alone, not when he might need me. That night, after my parents returned to their hotel, Grandpa knocked on my bedroom door. You shouldn't stay close to home because of me, he said softly. Your parents are right about one thing. You should choose the best opportunity. I looked up from my book. I am, I replied. UMass is practical, affordable, and has everything I need academically. And the fact it's 30 minutes away, he pressed. I closed my book. Is a bonus. But Grandpa, even if you weren't here, I wouldn't want what they're offering. Their version of success feels empty to me. I don't want to be like them, successful on paper, but disconnected from what matters. For the first time in our years together, I saw tears in Grandpa Williams' eyes. You've grown into an extraordinary young woman, Sloane, he said, his voice rough. I hope you know how proud I am. As I finished high school and began college, my relationship with my parents remained cordial but distant. They attended my high school graduation, arriving late and leaving early for business meetings. They sent generous checks for expenses, but rarely asked about my actual experiences. They existed on the periphery of my life, shadows of what might have been eclipsed by the solid, dependable presence of the man who had truly raised me. Hey everyone, I can see you're still with me on this journey. I'm so grateful for each of you listening to my story. If you're connecting with this tale of unexpected family bonds, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories like this one. I'm curious, has anyone else found family in unexpected places? Let me know in the comments. Now let's continue with what happened next. My college years at UMass Amherst brought new independence while allowing me to maintain the precious connection with Grandpa William. I'd drive home most weekends, arriving on Friday evenings to find him waiting on the porch with 2 mugs of tea, regardless of the weather. Tell me everything he'd say as we settled into our usual spots, and I would about challenging professors, new friends, research projects, and the occasional date. Unlike my parents who wanted to hear only achievements and successes, Grandpa wanted the whole truth, struggles, disappointments, and small victories alike. During my sophomore year, I noticed subtle changes in Grandpa. At 78, his memory occasionally slipped, and his arthritis made woodworking increasingly difficult. Rather than acknowledge these limitations, he found workarounds, meticulous notes on the refrigerator, adaptive tools in his workshop, longer rest periods between activities. My parents, in one of their rare phone calls, suggested assisted living. "Dad's getting older," Sloan Mom said, her voice carrying the false concern of someone who wanted a convenient solution. "We could find a really nice place for him. I've researched some options in Arizona near our vacation home." "He doesn't need assisted living," I replied firmly. "He needs occasional help, which I provide, and he would never leave his home." "You can't put your life on hold for him, forever," Dad interjected, the hypocrisy of his statement lost on him. "You're young. You should be focusing on internships, career opportunities, not elder care." I bit back a scathing response. "I'm managing both just fine. And it's not a burden, it's what family does." The silence on the other end spoke volumes. Despite their concerns, I excelled academically while supporting Grandpa. I earned prestigious internships during summer breaks but arranged them within commuting distance. When I was offered an amazing opportunity with the EPA in Boston after graduation, I found us a comfortable 2-bedroom apartment halfway between the city and Westfield, allowing us to keep the family home while making my commute manageable. Grandpa initially resisted the move. "I won't be the anchor that limits your opportunities," he insisted, standing in his workshop where we'd spent so many hours together. "You've never been my anchor, Grandpa," I replied, resting my hand on his increasingly frail shoulder. "You've been my lighthouse. Besides, this is temporary, just until your health stabilizes. Then we can reconsider." What I didn't tell him was what my parents had revealed during their latest perfunctory visit. They were considering selling their vacation property in Arizona, the one they'd planned to move him near. Their tech startup was facing financial difficulties, and they needed to consolidate assets. Their concern for his welfare had been as superficial as everything else they offered. Our new arrangement worked surprisingly well. I thrived at the EPA, working on water conservation initiatives that channeled my environmental engineering degree into meaningful projects. Grandpa found a community center near our apartment where he taught woodworking basics to children on weekends. His cognitive issues stabilized with proper medication and regular checkups. For the next 3 years, we built a fulfilling life together. I dated occasionally, but found most men my age couldn't understand my commitment to my grandfather. Most wanted spontaneous weekends away or late nights that didn't align with Grandpa's routines. I didn't mind between work caring for Grandpa and maintaining our bonds with neighbors in Westfield. My life felt rich and purposeful. Then, shortly after my 27th birthday, Grandpa's health took a serious turn. What began as persistent coughing was diagnosed as early-stage lung cancer. Though he'd never smoked, the doctors explained that environmental factors and age made it not uncommon. The prognosis was cautiously optimistic with treatment, but it would be challenging. I took immediate family leave from work and moved us back to the Westfield house, wanting him to face treatment in familiar surroundings. For the first time in years, I called my parents with a genuine expectation they might help. "Dad has cancer," I told my mother directly when she answered. "It's treatable, but he'll need support through chemotherapy." Her response was predictable. "Oh, that's terrible news," she said, her voice appropriately somber but distant. "What do the doctors say? Is it terminal? Not if treatment goes well. I've taken leave from work to help him through it." "You're such a good granddaughter," she replied the compliment, somehow feeling like an abdication. "Let us know if there's anything we can do from here." "You could come," I suggested bluntly. "Your father might appreciate seeing you during this time." A pause. "Well, we're in the middle of some critical negotiations with investors." But perhaps later in the summer, I ended the call shortly after any hope of meaningful support extinguished. Grandpa's treatment was grueling. Chemotherapy drained his energy and dimmed his usual vigor. On his worst days, he could barely leave his bed. I transformed our living room into a comfortable sick room where he could look out at his beloved garden. I learned to administer medications, manage side effects, and navigate the labyrinthine healthcare system. My employers were understanding extending my leave when necessary. Friends from college and work took turns visiting, bringing meals and companionship. Our Westfield neighbors rallied around us, mowing the lawn, shoveling snow, and ensuring we never felt alone. Through it all, Grandpa maintained his fundamental optimism. "This isn't how I expected to spend my 80s, he joked one afternoon as we sat in matching recliners doing a crossword together. "But I'm still the luckiest man I know." "Lucky to have cancer?" I asked skeptically. "Lucky to face it with you beside me," he clarified. "Lucky to have lived long enough to see the wonderful woman you've become." Many parents miss that blessing. The implied comparison to my absent parents hung between us, acknowledged but not dwelled upon. 6 months into treatment, we received the news we'd been hoping for. The cancer was in remission. Though Grandpa would never regain his former strength, the immediate threat had passed. I transitioned back to work part-time, arranging for a home health aide to assist when I couldn't be there. My parents sent an expensive fruit basket when they heard the good news, the card signed with their names, but no personal message. I placed it on Grandpa's bedside table without comment. Life slowly returned to a new normal. Grandpa couldn't manage the stairs to his workshop anymore, so I converted part of the sunroom into a small crafting space where he could work on smaller projects. I resumed full-time work but arranged for remote days when possible. We settled into a quieter rhythm, cherishing simple pleasures, garden walks, classic movies, the crosswords we both loved. On Grandpa's 82nd birthday, he asked me to help him with an important task. "I want to update my will," he said matter-of-factly, as we finished our celebration dinner. "Cancer has a way of clarifying priorities." "Grandpa, you're in remission," I protested. "Let's not focus on that now." He reached across the table to pat my hand. "Remission isn't immortality, Sloaney. I'm 82. It's simply prudent planning, not pessimism." The next week, we visited his longtime attorney, Mr. Abernathy, in downtown Westfield. I waited in the reception area while they spoke privately, respecting Grandpa's right to manage his affairs as he saw fit. When he emerged an hour later, he seemed lighter somehow, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "All done?" I asked, helping him navigate the 3 steps down to the street. "All done," he confirmed. "Now I can focus on living without worrying about what comes after." I didn't press for details. Whatever provisions he'd made were his business, and I trusted his judgment implicitly. My only concern was his comfort and happiness for whatever time we had left. As it turned out, we had almost 3 more years together. 3 years of quiet companionship, small adventures, when his strength permitted, and the deep, unspoken understanding that comes from weathering life's storms together. His remission held, though age continued its inevitable march. He grew frailer, needed more assistance, but his mind remained sharp and his spirit undiminished. My parents' contact during this time remained minimal, perfunctory holiday calls, the occasional email asking for updates but never offering help. I'd long since stopped expecting more and focused instead on cherishing each day with the man who had truly been my parent in every way that mattered. The call came on a Tuesday morning in early April. I was in a meeting at the EPA office when my phone vibrated with Mrs. Osgood's number, our neighbor who checked on Grandpa when I was at work. "Sloan," she said, when I stepped out to answer her voice, gentle but urgent. "You need to come home. Your grandfather collapsed in the garden. The ambulance is taking him to Baystate now." The next hours passed in a blur of hospital corridors, doctors' updates, and mounting dread. A massive stroke, they said. Extensive brain damage. Minimal brain activity. No reasonable expectation of recovery. I sat beside Grandpa's hospital bed, holding his weathered hand while machines breathed for him. His face, the face that had watched me grow up, that had creased with laughter at my jokes and furrowed with concentration as he taught me woodworking was slack and unresponsive. "I'm here, Grandpa," I whispered, though the doctors had explained he couldn't hear me. "I'm right here with you." For 2 days, I barely left his side. Friends brought changes of clothes, forced me to eat, urged me to rest. I called my parents, leaving messages that grew increasingly desperate when they didn't immediately respond. They finally called back late Thursday night. "We've booked flights," Mom said, her voice carrying the strange formality she always adopted in crises. "We should arrive tomorrow afternoon." "The doctors say he won't last that long," I replied, not bothering to hide the accusation in my voice. "They're talking about end-of-life comfort measures now." "We're coming as quickly as we can," Sloan Dad interjected, taking the phone. "These things are complicated. We have meetings to reschedule, arrangements to make. Even now," I thought bitterly. Even now he's not a priority. Grandpa William Monroe passed peacefully at 4:37 the next morning. I was holding his hand, telling him about the blue jays I'd seen outside his window, his favorite birds, when the monitors registered the change. The room filled with quiet efficiency, as nurses confirmed what I already knew: he was gone. I sat there for a long time, afterward suspended in grief so profound it felt like drowning. The man who had saved me, raised me, loved me unconditionally, had slipped away. The lighthouse that had guided me home was dark. My parents arrived that evening too late for anything but formalities. Mom's eyes were red-rimmed but dry. Dad looked uncomfortable in the hospital setting, continually checking his phone despite the no-cell-phone signs. "We're so sorry, honey," Mom said, embracing me stiffly. "He was a remarkable man." "You would know that if you'd bothered to visit more than once every few years," I replied, the words escaping before I could filter them through politeness. Dad sighed heavily. "Sloan, we're all grieving. Let's not do this now." "When should we do it, Dad?" I asked, suddenly exhausted by the pretense. "You've had 23 years to have a real conversation about abandoning me, and you've never bothered. Why start now?" The uneasy truce that followed carried us through the next few days of funeral arrangements. My parents took rooms at the local Marriott, while I returned alone to the empty house that echoed with Grandpa's absence. They offered help with funeral plans, but deferred to my decisions when I insisted acknowledging my deeper knowledge of Grandpa's preferences. Mr. Abernathy, Grandpa's attorney, called on Sunday evening. "I was deeply saddened to hear about William's passing," he said. "He was not just a client but a friend. I understand the funeral is scheduled for Tuesday." "Yes, at First Congregational. He attended there for 40 years. I'll certainly be there. And afterward, when you feel ready, we'll need to discuss the will." William was very specific about certain matters. "Of course," I replied. "Maybe later in the week, that would be fine. And Sloan, William asked me to tell you he was very proud of you." Those were his exact words. Fresh tears welled in my eyes. "Thank you for telling me." The funeral service itself was beautiful in its simplicity. Grandpa had left detailed instructions, favorite hymns, meaningful scripture passages, a request for donations to the local children's hospital in lieu of flowers. The church overflowed with people whose lives he had touched, former students, neighbors, colleagues, community members. I delivered a eulogy that celebrated his wisdom, kindness, and unwavering integrity. Speaking through tears, I shared how he had transformed abandonment into opportunity, teaching me that family is defined by actions, not blood alone. From my seat in the front pew, I could see my parents shifting uncomfortably during parts of my speech. Good, I thought with uncharacteristic bitterness. Let them squirm. After the service, everyone gathered at the Monroe home, Grandpa's home, my home for a reception. Mrs. Osgood and other neighbors had arranged everything, filling the house with food and flowers. I moved through the rooms in a daze, accepting condolences, sharing memories, feeling Grandpa's presence in every corner. My parents circulated separately, connecting with old acquaintances, accepting sympathies from people who remembered them from before they left. I watched them from across the room, struck by how out of place they seemed in the house they had abandoned along with me. As the reception wound down, Mr. Abernathy approached me quietly. "I know we plan to meet later this week," he said, "but your parents have requested an immediate reading of the will." They mentioned travel constraints. A flash of anger cut through my grief. Of course they did. "Fine," I replied, too tired to argue. "When I can do it now, if that works for you." Just the three of you in William's study. 20 minutes later, we sat in Grandpa's book-lined study me in his leather desk chair, my parents perched tensely on the sofa across the room. "Mr. Abernathy settled his briefcase on the desk and withdrew several documents. "Before I begin," he said formally, "William asked me to play something for you." He removed a USB drive from his pocket and plugged it into Grandpa's desktop computer. After a moment of technical adjustments, Grandpa's face appeared on the screen. He looked tired but composed clearly, recording this during his illness. "If you're watching this," he began, his familiar voice filling the room, "then I've moved on to whatever comes next. I hope it wasn't too hard at the end, and I hope you're all holding up okay." He paused, adjusting his glasses, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. "Sloane, my darling girl, you have been the greatest joy of my life. Taking you in was never a burden, it was my privilege. You grew from a wounded child into a remarkable woman of character, intelligence, and compassion. I could not be prouder if you were my own daughter. In many ways you were." Tears streamed down my face as his image smiled gently from the screen. "Eleanor Thomas," he continued, his tone shifting subtly as he addressed my parents, "I won't pretend to understand or approve of the choices you made. Leaving Sloane with me might have been your greatest mistake, but it was my greatest blessing. Still, she is your daughter, and I've never spoken ill of you to her. That was her decision to make." My parents stiffened visibly on the sofa. "Now, about my estate," Grandpa continued. "I've worked hard, lived simply, and invested wisely. The house in Westfield is paid off. My retirement accounts performed well, and I received a substantial settlement years ago after that chemical company lawsuit that I never spent. All told, my estate is worth approximately $2.7 million. I gasped audibly. Grandpa had always been comfortable but frugal. I had no idea he had accumulated such wealth. "Here's how it will be distributed," he said, leaning forward slightly. "To my daughter Eleanor and her husband Thomas, I leave the sum of $1 each." My father made a choked sound. My mother's hand flew to her throat. "This is not spite," Grandpa clarified, his eyes stern. "This is accountability. You abandoned your child and your responsibilities. You cannot abandon someone for 23 years and then expect to profit from their death." He paused, letting the words sink in. "To the Westfield Children's Hospital, I leave $200,000 for their new pediatric wing. To the First Congregational Church's Youth Education Fund, I leave $100,000. To my dear friends and neighbors who helped care for me and Sloane over the years, I leave specific bequests as outlined in my formal will." Another pause, and his expression softened again. "And to my granddaughter Sloane Avery Monroe, I leave the remainder of my estate, including the house, all investments, and personal property. Use it wisely, Sloaney. Build the life you want, not the one others expect. And remember what we always said about perspective count, the blessings face the challenges, and keep moving forward. His image smiled once more. I love you, kiddo. Always have, always will. The screen went dark, leaving a profound silence in its wake. Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat. That summarizes the essential provisions, though there are additional details in the formal documents. I should mention that William anticipated potential challenges to the will and took extensive precautions. He underwent comprehensive psychological evaluations during the drafting process and included a contest clause that would redirect any challenger's potential share to charity. My father stood abruptly. This is outrageous. He was clearly not of sound mind. To disinherit his own daughter, the daughter who abandoned her child with him for 2 decades, I interrupted, finding strength in Grandpa's posthumous support. The daughter who couldn't be bothered to visit during his cancer treatment. That daughter, we had careers responsibilities. Mom protested, her face flushed. And we provided financial support. Money isn't parenting, I snapped. Grandpa taught me that. He also taught me forgiveness, which is the only reason I've maintained any relationship with you at all. But if you challenge his will, that ends today. My father's expression hardened. We'll be consulting our own attorneys. That's your right, Mr. Abernathy replied calmly. But I should inform you that William's preparations were exceptionally thorough. Massachusetts law strongly favors testamentary freedom, and his mental competence is well documented. A challenge would be costly, protracted, and in my professional opinion, ultimately unsuccessful. They left shortly afterward, departing with cold formality and thinly veiled threats of legal action. Standing on the porch, watching their rental car pull away, I felt an odd mixture of grief, vindication, and finally, unexpectedly, peace. Grandpa's final act had been to protect me one last time, not just financially, but from the emotional manipulation that might have followed his passing. He had seen my parents clearly without illusions and had planned accordingly. Wow, I'm feeling emotional right now sharing this turning point in my story. If you're still here with me, thank you for your support through this journey. If this family drama is resonating with you or making you feel something, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories from my life. I'd love to know in the comments if you've ever witnessed a moment where justice was finally served in your family. Now let's continue to what happened after the funeral bombshell. True to their word, my parents initiated legal proceedings to contest Grandpa's will less than a week after the funeral. A courier delivered the formal notice to the house on a rainy Friday afternoon, clinical legal language claiming undue influence and diminished capacity, demanding a psychological autopsy and insinuating I had somehow manipulated Grandpa. During his illness, I sat at the kitchen table reading the documents, anger and disbelief washing over me in equal measure. The sheer audacity of their claims felt like a physical blow. After decades of absence, they now portrayed themselves as concerned family members who had been unfairly disinherited. Mr. Abernathy arrived within the hour of my panicked phone call, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to my emotional state. This is standard procedure in contested wills, he explained, reviewing the paperwork. Unpleasant, but not unexpected. They're claiming I manipulated him, I said, my voice breaking. That I isolated him and took advantage of his vulnerability. How can they say that when they're the ones who abandoned us? Both Mr. Abernathy removed his glasses, polishing them methodically. Legal challenges often employ unsavory tactics, Sloane. What matters is evidence, not accusations. Fortunately, Grandpa's foresight extended to this possibility. Beyond his videotaped statement, he had maintained detailed journals documenting my parents' minimal involvement in his life and mine. His medical records included cognitive assessments, confirming his mental clarity until the stroke. The will itself had been witnessed by respected community members with no personal stake in the outcome. "Your grandfather was exceptionally thorough," Mr. Abernathy said, organizing the documents into neat stacks. He anticipated this reaction and prepared accordingly. Still, the legal process proved grueling. Depositions forced me to relive painful memories, the day my parents left birthdays, spent waiting for phone calls that never came holidays, celebrated with just Grandpa and me. My parents' attorneys portrayed our close relationship as suspicious, suggesting I had deliberately alienated them to secure my inheritance. The most difficult moment came 3 months into the proceedings, when my mother testified about her repeated attempts to maintain a relationship with me. "We called regularly," she claimed, her voice convincingly earnest. "We sent gifts, invited her to visit. But William always made excuses why she couldn't come. Eventually, we realized he was trying to keep her from us. The lie was so blatant, so contrary to my lived experience, that I nearly shouted in the conference room. My attorney squeezed my arm in warning, making notes for cross-examination. Later, when presented with phone records showing the actual frequency of their calls, averaging less than once a month, and documentation of the 3 total invitations I'd received in 20 years, my mother faltered. "Well, we were very busy building our business," she amended, "but our intentions were good." What struck me most throughout the proceedings was their apparent conviction in their own narrative. They seemed to genuinely believe they had been devoted, concerned parents temporarily separated from their child by circumstance rather than choice. They had rewritten our history into something that absolved them of guilt. 6 months into the legal battle, my father approached me outside the courthouse after a particularly contentious hearing. "This isn't personal, Sloan," he said, looking uncomfortable in his expensive suit. "It's about principle. William had no right to cut Eleanor out completely. She was his daughter, and I was yours," I replied quietly. "Yet you cut me out completely when I was 9 years old. That's not fair." We were going through a difficult time. For 23 years, I interrupted, too tired for pretense. "Dad, just stop. This isn't about principle. It's about money you didn't earn and don't deserve." His expression hardened. "You have no idea what we deserve. We built something from nothing while raising you. Grandpa William raised me," I corrected. "You visited occasionally." "Because he made it so difficult," he exclaimed, revealing the depth of his self-deception. "He turned you against us from the beginning." I shook my head, recognizing the futility of the conversation. "Grandpa never spoke ill of you to me. Not once. He let me form my own opinions based on your actions. That's the difference between him and you. He trusted me with the truth, even when it was painful." The legal proceedings dragged on for nearly a year, draining my emotional resources, if not my financial ones. Thanks to Grandpa's meticulous planning, my legal fees were covered by the estate. My parents, however, were spending their own money on increasingly desperate maneuvers. Their financial situation, it emerged, was more precarious than I'd realized. Their tech company had faltered during the pandemic, and subsequent ventures had failed to recover their losses. The prospect of inheriting even a portion of Grandpa's estate had become not just desirable but necessary to maintain their lifestyle. The irony was not lost on me. The daughter they had abandoned was now the potential solution to their financial troubles. 9 months into the battle, my attorney called with unexpected news. "They're offering to settle," she said. "They'll drop all claims in exchange for $500,000. I laughed bitterly. "Absolutely not. It would end this," she pointed out. "You could move forward without the constant stress of litigation." I considered it, briefly tempted by the prospect of peace. But Grandpa's voice seemed to echo in my mind. "Integrity means doing what's right, even when it's difficult." "No," I said firmly. "They abandoned their child for 2 decades and now want to profit from the man who stepped up in their place. I won't reward that." 2 weeks later, the judge issued her ruling. In a 15-page decision, she systematically dismantled my parents' claims, citing the overwhelming evidence of Grandpa's mental competence and their minimal involvement in his life. The will would stand as written. Outside the courthouse, after the final hearing, reporters from the local paper asked for comment. My parents pushed past with tight-lipped no comments, hurrying to their waiting car. When the microphones turned to me, I paused, considering my words carefully. William Monroe was an extraordinary man who taught me that family is defined by actions, not blood, I said finally. His legacy isn't just financial, it's the values he lived by: integrity, responsibility, and unconditional love. I hope to honor that legacy in how I use what he's entrusted to me. That evening alone in the quiet house, I felt Grandpa's presence more strongly than at any time since his death. Sitting in his workshop, surrounded by the projects we had built together, I finally allowed myself to fully grieve, not just for him, but for the parents I had never really had, and the childhood that had been disrupted. Yet, amid the grief, I found gratitude. The abandonment that had seemed so devastating had led me to Grandpa William, whose love and guidance had shaped me into the person I had become. My parents left town the next day without contacting me. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned they had sold their California home and moved to a smaller condo in Arizona. The legal fees had apparently depleted their remaining resources significantly. Part of me felt sympathy for their situation, but a larger part recognized it as the natural consequence of their choices, not just regarding the will contest, but the pattern of self-interest that had defined their lives. 3 weeks after the court's decision, a letter arrived with an Arizona postmark. My mother's handwriting, once so familiar from the occasional birthday cards, now seemed like a relic from another life. The letter inside was brief but unexpected. Sloan, the past year has forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about our choices and their consequences. While we still believe your grandfather's actions were unfair, we recognize that our own actions created the situation that led to his decision. We are not asking for forgiveness or financial assistance. Too much has happened for simple resolutions. But we wanted to acknowledge that we failed you as parents and that William gave you what we did not. For what it's worth, we are sorry. Eleanor and Thomas, I read the letter several times, searching for the manipulative angle, the hidden request, the subtle blame shifting that had characterized their communications for years. Finding none, I placed it in Grandpa's old desk drawer, not quite ready to respond, but not rejecting the tiny olive branch it represented either. In the months following the legal resolution, I found myself at a crossroads. The house that had been my sanctuary felt simultaneously comforting and confining, filled with memories that both healed and hurt. My job at the EPA, which I had maintained through the tumult of Grandpa's illness, and the subsequent legal battles no longer felt fulfilling. The inheritance gave me options I had never imagined possible, but freedom can be its own kind of burden when you're unsure of your direction. One evening, sorting through Grandpa's papers in his study, I discovered a sealed envelope with my name, written in his distinctive handwriting. Inside was a letter dated just weeks before his stroke. My dearest Sloanie, if you're reading this, I've likely moved on to whatever adventure comes next. Don't grieve too long, I've had a full life made fuller by having you in it. You're standing at a threshold now. The resources I've left you aren't just financial security, they're possibility. The question is, what will you do with possibility? Remember our woodworking projects. How we'd start with raw materials and envision what they could become. Your life is like that now, raw potential, waiting for your vision and craftsmanship. You've spent so many years being responsible for yourself, for me, for your work. Perhaps it's time to ask what brings you joy. What would you create if limitation wasn't a concern? What wrong would you right? What difference would you make? I have my suspicions about what might light your path forward. I've seen how you come alive teaching neighborhood children in my workshop. I've noticed your passionate research into sustainable building practices. I've observed your careful stewardship of resources and your instinctive protection of those who are vulnerable. Whatever you choose, remember two things. First, wealth is a tool, not a purpose. Second, the measure of a life well lived isn't in what you accumulate, but in what you contribute. I love you more than words can express. Go forward boldly. Grandpa William, I sat with the letter clutched to my chest, tears flowing freely. Even from beyond, he was still guiding me, still believing in me, still encouraging me to become my best self. That night I couldn't sleep. Instead, I sat on the porch, swing our spot for perspective time, and let my thoughts wander. What did bring me joy? What contribution could I make that would honor Grandpa's legacy while expressing my own purpose? The answer began to take shape gradually. I remembered the children who had flocked to Grandpa's weekend woodworking classes. I thought about my environmental engineering background and passion for sustainability. I recalled Grandpa's philosophy that working with your hands connected you to reality in an increasingly virtual world. By morning, the seed of an idea had sprouted. 3 months later, I submitted my resignation to the EPA and began the process of establishing the William Monroe Foundation for Sustainable Craftsmanship, a nonprofit organization dedicated to teaching traditional crafts and sustainable building practices to underprivileged youth. I converted part of Grandpa's property into a teaching workshop, hiring local craftspeople to serve as instructors. We partnered with community schools to identify students who might benefit from our programs, particularly those from challenging backgrounds who needed constructive outlets and mentorship. The work was demanding but deeply fulfilling. Watching children discover the satisfaction of creating something tangible with their hands reminded me of my own journey in Grandpa's workshop. Many of our students came from broken homes or foster care children who, like me, had experienced abandonment or instability. Through craftsmanship, they found not just skills but confidence, patience, and pride in their accomplishments. As the foundation grew, so did my own sense of purpose. I developed a curriculum that integrated environmental science with traditional crafts, teaching students not just how to build, but why sustainable practices mattered. We expanded to include classes in furniture, making home repair, sustainable gardening, and green building techniques. The most unexpected development came 18 months after launching the foundation. A local family court judge who had heard about our programs reached out with a proposition. Would we consider offering specialized workshops for families in the reunification process, parents who had temporarily lost custody and were working to rebuild relationships with their children? The idea struck close to home in ways that were both painful and healing. These were parents who, unlike mine, were actively trying to repair the damage their choices had caused. After careful consideration, I agreed to a pilot program. Our family workshops became a unique form of therapy, parents and children working side by side on projects that required communication, cooperation, and patience. The metaphor wasn't subtle relationships. Like craftsmanship require time, attention, and care to build something that lasts. Watching these families struggle, fail, try again, and occasionally succeed gave me a new perspective on my own parents. While I couldn't excuse their abandonment, I began to understand the complex human failings that might have contributed to their choices: insecurity, immaturity, the allure of freedom from responsibility. I thought often of their letter, the closest thing to an apology I had ever received. After months of reflection, I finally sent a brief response. Thank you for your acknowledgement. I'm using Grandpa's legacy to help children and families build stronger bonds through craftsmanship. Some of these families are healing from situations like ours. If you're ever interested in seeing this work, you would be welcome to visit. Sloan, I didn't expect a reply, and for several months, none came. Then, on what would have been Grandpa's 86th birthday, I received a call from an unknown Arizona number. Sloan, it's your mother. Her voice sounded older, more hesitant than I remembered. We spoke awkwardly for a few minutes about neutral topics, the weather, her new condo, my foundation work. "We've been following your foundation online," she said eventually. "The work you're doing with those children. It's remarkable." "Thank you," I replied, unsure where the conversation was heading. A pause then. "We've been doing some work ourselves." Therapy. Trying to understand our choices better. Another pause. "It's come rather late, I know." "Better late than never," I offered, surprising myself with the lack of bitterness in my voice. "Yes. Well," she cleared her throat. "We were wondering if your invitation to visit the foundation still stands. Not to interfere or impose, just to see what you've built." The question caught me off guard. Part of me wanted to refuse to protect the new life I had created from their disruptive presence, but a larger part recognized the opportunity this represented, not for reconciliation necessarily, but for closure, for a more complete understanding. "The invitation stands," I said carefully, "but with boundaries. This would be a visit, not a reunion. I'm not ready for more than that." "We understand," she replied, and I thought I detected relief in her voice. "Thank you, Sloan." They visited the following month on a crisp autumn day when the foundation was hosting an open house. They looked older than I remembered, more subdued. My father's once commanding presence seemed diminished. My mother's carefully maintained appearance, showing signs of financial constraint. I introduced them simply as Eleanor and Thomas to my staff, offering no explanation of our relationship. They observed classes, asked appropriate questions, and maintained a respectful distance as I conducted my normal activities. At one point, I found my mother watching a teenage girl carefully sanding a jewelry box, similar to ones Grandpa had taught me to make. "He taught you that, didn't he?" she asked quietly, nodding toward the project. "Yes," I replied, "when I was 13. She nodded, something like regret flickering across her features. "He was always good with his hands, patient. I never appreciated that growing up." "He was patient in every way," I said, "including waiting for you to visit, which you rarely did." She flinched but didn't argue. "We made so many mistakes, Sloan, too many to ever fully make right." It wasn't a question, so I offered no reassurance. Some truth simply had to be acknowledged. Before they left, my father awkwardly pressed a check into my hand. "For the foundation," he explained hurriedly. "It's not much, but we wanted to contribute something." I looked at the amount, $5,000. Not insignificant for people in their financial situation. "Thank you," I said, accepting it with a nod. "The children will benefit." We parted with no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful embraces, no promises of regular contact. Just a quiet acknowledgement that, while the past couldn't be undone, the future remained unwritten. In the years that followed, we established a cautious, limited relationship, monthly phone calls, occasional emails, a brief visit when I had business in Arizona. They were not the parents I had needed as a child, and I was no longer the daughter seeking their approval. We were instead adults, finding a way to acknowledge our connection without ignoring its complicated history. 5 years after Grandpa William's passing, the William Monroe Foundation had grown beyond my initial vision. What began as a local program now operated satellite workshops in 3 states, had been featured in national publications, and had received grants from major environmental and educational organizations. Over 2,000 children had passed through our programs, many returning year after year as they progressed to more advanced projects. On a personal level, I had found unexpected joy in my role as a teacher and mentor. The children called me Miss Sloan, looking to me with the same trust and expectation I had once directed toward Grandpa. The responsibility was humbling, the reward immeasurable. I had also, somewhat to my surprise, found love. Daniel Chen, an architectural engineer specializing in sustainable building, had volunteered his expertise for one of our advanced workshops. His patience with struggling students, combined with his brilliant mind and quiet sense of humor, had drawn me to him immediately. After 2 years of dating, we were discussing marriage and family possibilities I had once thought might be closed to me because of my own complicated relationship with family. "Do you think your experiences make you hesitant about having children?" Daniel asked one evening, as we walked through Grandpa's garden, now expanded to include a community vegetable plot for our students. I considered the question seriously. Not hesitant exactly, more determined to do it differently, to be present in ways my parents weren't. "You're worried about repeating patterns," he observed. "I think everyone is in their own way. But I had Grandpa as my model, not them." He showed me what real parenting looks like, the daily commitment, the unwavering support. Daniel squeezed my hand. "From what I've seen of you with the foundation kids, you've learned those lessons well." The evolution of my relationship with my parents continued at its own careful pace. After their initial visit to the foundation, they had made small but consistent efforts to remain connected. They never asked for money again, never challenged Grandpa's decisions, never attempted to insert themselves too deeply into my life. On my 32nd birthday, the age they had been when they left me with Grandpa, my mother sent a letter that showed more self-awareness than I had thought possible. Reaching the age we were when we made the worst decision of our lives must feel significant. I want you to know that we recognize the damage our choices caused, and we see clearly now what we couldn't or wouldn't see. Then, that parenthood isn't something you can put on hold when it becomes inconvenient, that a child needs constancy above all else, that by trying to find ourselves, we lost something irreplaceable, the chance to know our daughter as she grew up. William gave you what we didn't, and you thrived despite our absence, not because of it. The foundation you've created in his name is testament to both his influence and your resilience. We take no credit for the remarkable woman you've become, but we are profoundly grateful to know you even in this limited way as an adult. The letter required no response, so I offered none. But I kept it alongside Grandpa's final letter to me in his old desk drawer bookends, to a journey I was still processing. As the 5th anniversary of Grandpa's passing approached, I found myself drawn back to the legal documents from that difficult time. Reviewing the court transcripts and filings, I was struck by how much emotional energy had been expended on the battle energy that could have been directed toward healing, toward building something positive. On impulse, I called my parents. "I'm establishing a new scholarship program through the foundation," I explained after the usual pleasantries. "For first-generation college students whose parents are unable to support their education. I'd like to name it after all three of us, the Monroe Avery Family Scholarship." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if the connection had dropped. "That's unexpected," my father finally said, his voice thick. "Why would you include us?" my mother asked directly. "Because while our story isn't simple, it is ours," I replied. "And because Grandpa taught me that even painful experiences can be transformed into something constructive if we choose to learn from them." They contributed what they could to the initial funding, another modest check that represented sacrifice on their part. More significantly, they agreed to record video messages for scholarship recipients about the importance of family support and educational opportunity, speaking frankly about their own failures and the consequences of prioritizing self over responsibility. The scholarship program launched that fall, providing not just financial support but mentorship and internship opportunities through the foundation's growing network. The first 5 recipients were exceptional young people who had overcome significant family challenges to pursue higher education, kindred spirits to the 9-year-old girl I had once been. At the scholarship reception, I found myself standing between my parents in an awkward family photo, our first in over 2 decades. We were not a reconciled family in any traditional sense. Too much had happened, too much time had passed, too many formative experiences had been missed. But we had found a way to acknowledge our shared history while creating something positive from its painful lessons. Later that evening alone, in Grandpa's workshop now, my workshop, I ran my hands over the smooth oak of a jewelry box we had built together when I was a teenager. The craftsmanship had endured the wood, developing a deeper patina with time. Like our relationship, it had been built to last. I thought about Grandpa's final message to me. The measure of a life well lived isn't in what you accumulate, but in what you contribute. His contribution had been saving a child abandoned by her parents, providing not just shelter but understanding, not just care but wisdom. My contribution was transforming that personal experience into opportunities for other children to find their own strength and purpose through creating with their hands. And my parents, perhaps their contribution was serving as a cautionary tale, both in their failures and in their belated efforts to acknowledge them, proof that while we cannot change the past, we can choose to learn from it to grow beyond it, to build something better from its painful lessons. In the quiet of the workshop, surrounded by the tools Grandpa had taught me to use, and the legacy he had entrusted me to carry forward, I felt a sense of completion. Not of my journey, which continued to unfold in unexpected ways, but of the circle that had begun when two people left and one man stepped up to fill the void they created. The abandonment that had shaped my childhood had led through Grandpa's love and guidance to a purpose larger than myself. The inheritance he left was not just financial, but spiritual, a legacy of integrity, responsibility, and unconditional love that I now passed on to others who needed it. And that I realized was the most fitting tribute to William Monroe, not just preserving his memory, but extending his impact through each life, touched by the foundation that bore his name, each child who discovered their own capacity for creation, each family that found a path to healing through working together. In that moment, I felt Grandpa's presence as clearly as if he sat beside me on his old workshop stool. "Well done, Sloane," I could almost hear him say. "You've built something that matters." I think that's the lesson I'd like to leave you with today. Family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up, who stays, who builds you up when others walk away. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments about the family members blood-related or chosen who shaped your life in positive ways. Has karma or justice ever played out in your family story? Share your experiences below. If you connected with this story of family betrayal, unexpected legacies, and finding strength through difficult times, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories. Share this with someone who might need to hear that abandoned doesn't mean broken. Sometimes it just means being redirected to where you truly belong. Thank you for spending this time with me today, and remember, the family that matters most is the one that shows you through actions, not just words that you matter to them.